What's going on, everybody? It's that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 98 on this Monday, July 22nd, 2024. 39 days. We're in the 30s now until the opener, Oklahoma and Temple at the stadium on August 30th. Josh Callaway, Tom Green with you to kick off what is the final pre-fall camp week. They start practice at the tail end of next week. We're getting very close. July starts to wind down. Fall camp's coming up. We're getting excited. Oklahoma stays hot on the recruiting trail. Another defensive line pickup over the weekend. We'll, of course, talk about that in that 2025 class. What's Oklahoma's toughest game this year? An interesting question that may seem obvious, but it's really not. There are a lot of games you can make an argument for. Fun combo there. We'll get into that a little bit. And then we'll catch up with Porter Moser and OU basketball a little bit on the show today, too. Some good news this weekend. And some bad news this weekend. We'll talk about both ends of the spectrum there a little bit on the back end. But, Tom, let's start with Floyd Boucard, who we talked about on Friday a little bit, the defensive lineman from Miami Central High School down there in your neck of the woods in Florida. He would announce his commitment on Saturday on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, and he did commit to Oklahoma, the fifth defensive line pickup in this class from Miguel Chavis and Todd Bates, stacking that on top of, obviously, the behemoth 2024 power line group the previous year. Another big get here, and they continue to stay hot. It's been a very good last month or so, and that's been how it's been under Brent Venables. Just June, July stretch has been where they really make a lot of moves, and it's been the same this summer. Another huge get here, bringing in Floyd Boucard.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't surprised, especially if you're a subscriber to Sooners Illustrated.
Right.
You knew that all signs were pointing toward Floyd Boucard committing to Oklahoma, and that's exactly what happened. Like you said, a really strong group that they've put together again. C.J. Nixon, Kamari Moore, Trent Wilson. Just a really solid group. Again, stacking classes. So much attention on that last class with David Stone and Jaden Jackson, and then Danny Okoye and Nigel Smith, and obviously bringing in Dominic Williams to complement that group moving forward. But, I mean, they're doing a good job. And Brent Venables spoke about it some last week at SEC Media Days. He was asked about the lines of scrimmage and whether they're, where they need to be going in the SEC. And he spoke about how, they've worked tirelessly the last 2+ years to get those rooms where they need to be. And he feels really good about both lines of scrimmage right now. I think you probably feel a little bit better about the defensive line than you do the offensive line at this point. But they just keep continuing to kind of reshape and restock and reload this room for competing in the SEC moving forward and be able to sustain that.
Yeah, like you said, the trenches, that's where you have to kind of build SEC. And you look at, and we talked about it a bunch of times, stacking classes. And they did it last year, or they started to do it last year with that group headlined by David Stone. Now you have this group here, 5 guys who are all difference makers, some of them a little undervalued. Floyd Boucard is a very high 3-star, could easily elevate up before he actually signs, in December. But offensive line as well. Look at the group that they just signed this past year with Eugene Brooks and Eddie Pierre-Louis. Those guys, this coming class, he had a few more big ones, and then some other big names hanging out there still, like a Michael Fasusi, who we talked about a bunch of times. They're doing it the way that it needs to be done and building from the inside out. Obviously, the skill positions are still great. We've talked about that a bunch of times with what Emma Jones doing at wide receiver and what Brandon Hall, they're done in the secondary. But the trenches, that's where you're noticing the biggest change in this regime than maybe previous ones that also recruited well. They didn't do this down inside. And so a huge get, again, with Floyd Boucard. I recommend you go to Oklahoma247sports.com. Great commitment store to learn more about Floyd, and then some great analysis pieces. We have got, obviously, Colin Kennedy with our site does a phenomenal job for OU fans. But then we have got the best national guys of anyone at 24/7 Sports. Brian Doan all over it. He knows that area extremely well down there in Florida. So some great stuff from those guys on what Floyd Boucard means. So I suggest you mosey on over, become a VIP subscriber, Oklahoma247sports.com, and learn more about the latest pickup for Oklahoma, that defensive line. They continue to stack that thing up.
Yeah, and we should say this should probably close the book on their defensive line for the 2025 class.
Yeah, I would think so.
We've seen them kind of promote that 2025 power line graphic as well. I believe after Floyd Boucard committed on Saturday, they did it again and said, hey, it's complete. they were recruiting some other guys like Cade Peterzak, who committed to Nebraska on Saturday. There was a while where,
Yep.
it seemed like he was an Oklahoma lean, but, signs started pointing toward him going to Nebraska, did that over the weekend too. So Floyd Boucard's commitment, barring any changes, any, late additions or, potential transfer guys after the season, stuff like that, that should close the book on the defensive line group for the 2025 class.
Absolutely. So a good group there. And we'll continue to see how they continue to add, like I said, some big offensive linemen still hanging out there as they continue to round this 25 class into form before signing days. They kind of make the finishing touches on what's another really good group for Venables and this staff. So, like I said at the beginning, we're 39 days from the opener. Fall camp is just around the corner. At this point in the summer, we're looking at the schedule. I'm sure fans are doing the same thing. I'm looking at the schedule, I don't know about every day, but close to it, just kind of looking ahead like, oh, we're close. We're getting close to the start of the year. Between doing that and then the story that you wrote, Tom, last week about Jackson talking about his first road game in Auburn, and we talked about Carson Beck, talked about on the show a little bit last week, I kind of get to thinking, what actually is like the toughest game on the schedule this year? So I said, let's bring it to the pod. Let's discuss it, because this was never a conversation the last several years. It was a Texas game. I mean, that's just the way the schedule was in the Big 12. It was very obvious. It's not obvious this year. The way I look at it, you're not going to pick any of the non-conference games. They're all at home. They're all against inferior competition for Oklahoma. You're probably not going to pick South Carolina at home either, I wouldn't imagine. But the other 7, you can kind of talk me into in different ways based off either it's a road game, the placement on the schedule, the opponent, whatever it may be. So I'm curious, in your opinion, SEC guy, the road venues better than certainly I do, or most people in this market. What in your mind is maybe Oklahoma's toughest game this year? Because there are a lot of candidates, truthfully, on the schedule this year that you could make an argument for that I would listen to. What do you think?
I mean, to me, it's LSU.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I don't necessarily think it's going to be the biggest game. I still think that's Texas.
Sure.
A case can be made for Tennessee because it's that SEC opener, and it's kind of a litmus test in that first month of the season. But to me, it's playing at LSU, especially with the possibility of that being a night game in Death Valley. That stadium is intimidating, man. It's loud.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. Over 100,000 people. At night, that place is something different. And the fact that it's coming the week after you play Alabama doesn't make it any easier. And it's a little bit of a shorter week because of Thanksgiving and everything that goes in with that. That is going to be the most difficult test of the season for Oklahoma, in my opinion. Just between, LSU is obviously a really good team. Questions about their defense, certainly, but they think that they're going to be better. That's what they brought Blake Baker in to do. But playing on the road at LSU, and especially, look, regardless of the stakes, I think it's a tough game. If both of these teams are in position where, we're talking about SEC championship game appearance stake, or, potential college football playoff spot on the line, jostling for position there late in the season, that's just going to intensify this game. That atmosphere is going to be nuts. Look, I think the Alabama game is going to be tough just because Alabama is the most talented team, top to bottom, on the schedule. That Auburn game, that first SEC road game, is going to be difficult. I think Oklahoma, gets a little bit of a saving grace there that it's a day game and not a night game, because I think, similar to LSU, night games at Jordan-Hare Stadium are just kind of a different animal. We heard the quote from Jackson Arnold, or what Carson Beck told Jackson Arnold, was that place is cursed. And Georgia's had success there the last decade. But that place, there's a joke about, Jordan-Hare voodoo, Auburn Jesus coming to save the day for them all the time. Crazy things happen there. But for my money, it's the LSU game that is going to be the most challenging game of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get a big argument from me, especially like you mentioned it, the fact that it's right after the Alabama game. That's as brutal of a back-to-back as there is in college football this year. Without perusing every schedule, and some of these teams, I know Florida, like the back end of their schedule this year is hilarious and things like that. But that is a tough back-to-back, because the way I look at it, I mean, Tennessee, the first SEC game, Tennessee's just good. I mean, they have a stud young quarterback, obviously Josh Heupel, all of that. you could make an argument for that. Like you said, Auburn, the first road game, and that place is going to be jumping. That place is going to be electric. That's OU's first road game. Auburn's going to be aware of that. That crowd's going to be on fire. All that stuff. Obviously, Texas is Texas. They're really good again this year. The Cotton Bowl's its own thing.
That's the biggest game on the schedule.
Sure.
LSU is the toughest.
Yeah, sure. And, I was tempted to, the one thing that's honestly keeping me from Ole Miss, because the Ole Miss game is the one, because it's in the Grove, and I think Ole Miss is going to be pretty darn good this year, and they have Jackson Dart back for a third year. So he's been there and done that with Lane Kiffin. They know each other, and they've been so good in the portal. That place is going to be on fire as well. It's an early kick, a little bit of a saving grace for Oklahoma there. I think I would love to. I don't know. It's hard because there is like 6 or 7 you could really make a good argument for. I do think I probably agree at the end of the day that in Death Valley, especially if it's at night, it's just going to be different. Did you see the Jackson Arnold quote that got taken completely out of context this week as well? He was at SC Media's.
Yeah,
on a radio spot. I can't remember with who. Someone in Baton Rouge, I believe. Yeah. And he basically said, like, he wants it to be a night game. Hopefully they can score some points and simmer it down. Of course, it doesn't take much for opposing in college football in general, but especially in the SEC, for somebody to clip something and just run with it. But that's the mindset you have to have if you're Jackson Arnold. I want it to be a night game. I want to see what it's like, and we can handle it because it is going to be a different animal. I mean, it's in a lot of people's minds, college football guys who have been in a lot of these places, in a lot of people's mind, that is the number one home field advantage in the sport. So it's hard to pick against it.
Yeah. And look, Jackson talked about it when he was, in the main room too, that the venue he is most excited to see is Death Valley, especially if it's a night game. He wants to experience that. And, Danny Stutzman said something similar. It's like, you, as a competitor, you want that hostility. You want to go in there and you want to experience that. Certainly the part that got taken out of context was Jackson saying, maybe we go in there, score some points and quiet it down. It's like, if that's what's going to ruffle your feathers as an LSU fan, then like, what are we even doing here? Like,
right.
It's not like he went in there and said, oh yeah, we're not, intimidated. That place is
nothing.
Nothing. Yeah. So yeah, I think all these guys are kind of looking forward to that LSU game because only I think one player on the roster has experienced a game at LSU. I have to like go back and double check like everybody that came in from other schools, but Dejon Terry played there a few years ago when he was at Tennessee.
Right.
It was an early game, so he didn't get to experience it at night. But there's the possibility for this being a night game, and that atmosphere is going to be absolutely insane. I've been there for night games before. It's one of the unmatched experiences in college football. That atmosphere when they play Colin Baton Rouge before kickoff, it just goes crazy. Especially late in the season, you can get a little bit of a chill in the air. It's still probably going to be a little bit muggy though. I've been to several games at Ole Miss. Those 11 a.m. or noon kickoffs just, kind of stale.
Not the same. Yeah.
They just don't move. They just don't move the needle as much. I've been to Missouri once. They weren't as good as they are now, so I'm sure it's going to be a little bit tougher with that team that they have now.
Yeah.
But that LSU game is just, man, that is going to be an eye-opener for a lot of people who are Oklahoma fans who have not experienced what a hostile road environment is. Because as Brent Venables said last week, he said, look, these are some of the biggest stadiums, the most passionate fans. They're not half full. Those things are rocking before kickoff. That is not something that Oklahoma necessarily experienced week in, week out in the Big 12.
Yeah, the last time I heard Colin Baton Rouge played in a stadium was at the Boone Pickens Stadium in 2021, whenever they played it during Bedlam, whenever there was all those Lincoln Riley LSU rumors swirling. It'll be a little different this time around. Since we agree, before we move on, what would be the next in your mind? Is it Texas? Is it the Alabama game? Is it Auburn? Is it what would be the next for you? Is it that Ole Miss game? I think Missouri, there's an argument to be made too, because that game is going to be toxic, and Missouri is going to be good. I mean, I know there's been a lot of kind of Missouri's on Oklahoma's level, and historically they're obviously not. Nobody's going to make that argument with a straight face. But Missouri's going to be a good team this year. They have arguably the best receiver in the country in Luther Burden. They're going to be a good team. What would be next for you if after LSU?
I think it's probably Texas. Even though Oklahoma has largely dominated that series, like Texas talent-wise is on par with Oklahoma. We've talked about the unique environment that is the Cotton Bowl, how, once you cross the 50, you're either in Austin or you're in Norman. And especially with the way that game ended last year, kind of the expectations going into the season for Texas, which, picked to finish second, picked to finish second in the league, to play Georgia in the SEC championship in this first year. There's a lot of hype around Texas, people probably undervaluing Oklahoma to a bit of an extent. And, it's a rivalry game. So I think that's probably, like I said, the biggest game on their schedule and arguably the second most difficult given the circumstances.
Sure. No, what I also kind of noticed, and we talked about it back at the time when the schedule came out, many months ago, but kind of reinforcing it, kind of just going back over and looking ahead of the season, that even though it's really tough, Oklahoma did get a little fortunate in where kind of the bye weeks are and things like that, which I think we talked about it more when it came out, but you kind of, when you look back at it, it kind of reinforces it. Like, they have a bye week before the Texas game.
And so does Texas, I believe.
In between the Missouri and Ole Miss game is when they play Maine. They have a bye week before the Alabama LSU back-to-back. Yeah. So some strategically placed buys and stuff in there. Maine's not a bye week, but it's a de facto one. That helps a little because the schedule is obviously tough. I don't remember a schedule ever where, again, I would listen to an argument for 5 or 6 of these games as being the toughest one. So it'll be fun. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to the season. I perused the schedule, both OUs and just like the college football slate. Like, just when my mind wanders, I just look at it and it's like, oh boy, we're getting close. It's getting close. Week 0 is now less than 5 weeks away. It was 5 weeks from this past Saturday from week 0. So it's getting real close. We're excited. All right, let's do a little bit of hoops. We haven't talked about Porter Moser, OU basketball in a while. I mean, obviously it's been, it was a rough off season at the beginning of it. They kind of found their footing, made some additions. We kind of talked about what they think this team might be this year. It's a bit of a question mark. But we had a couple of news pieces over the weekend I figure we'll get into here. We'll start with the bad news. So Jeff Nwankwo, the JUCO transfer from Callaway College in Kansas, he's a former Oklahoma kid. He's still an Oklahoma kid, but he played high school ball at Putnam City North, so it's right down the road. He suffered a torn Achilles this week in summer workouts. A source confirmed that with Sooners Illustrated yesterday. He's going to be out a long time. The source I spoke with didn't say for sure if he'd be out for the season. They're still thinking maybe he could make it back by the end, but at the very least, he's going to miss a lot of this upcoming season. Tom, try to paint a picture for what this could be. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what role he would have because there is so many new faces on the team, but it had seemed like from afar that he was a guy that they thought could be a contributor this year, and now you lose somebody. Tough break. It really just kind of, on a human level, it kind of stinks, too, for this Oklahoma kid playing at OU, and the season kind of got taken away from him a bit here. Tough blow for Oklahoma in July. You're not expecting this.
Yeah, I think when they when we thought at the time they had finalized the roster, and we'll get a little bit more into that in a minute, but earlier this summer when we thought they had kind of, retooled the roster completely and, had all the spots filled, I kind of did like a projected rotation, what I thought it would look like. And I thought that Jeff Nwankwo is a guy that could be your starting wing. He is one of the few guys on this roster who is like already like an SEC caliber athlete. I mean, you talk about it, he's played junior college basketball the last 2 years. But before that, he was a wide receiver at Tulane for a season.
Yeah,
he is a really, really good athlete. And you watch his highlights, you watch how he plays. He reminds me a lot of Jalen Moore. Kind of a little bit of a different skill set because he's not as big as Jalen, but more of a wing than like a 3/4, which in Jalen's case even an undersized 5 in that small ball lineup. But the same kind of caliber of athlete, like, he's going to get in there and he's going to, go, flying around and get to the basket. And, I thought that he could be a guy that would start for this team. And I'd heard really good things about him throughout the summer. So I think this is a big loss for them. Certainly not what you want at any point. Seems like a good kid. I'd heard great things about him from his, JUCO coaches when he signed. Just a really difficult blow, and that Achilles, like, it's so weird because a decade ago, you hear an Achilles, and that's a career ender.
Yeah, right.
And now it's like, okay, he'll probably be back next season.
Right.
Just the advancements in modern medicine make it
Sure.
really fascinating, just how kind of the outlook of those injuries changes. But it is without a doubt a difficult blow for Oklahoma heading into the SEC.
Yeah, it is. I kind of, this is a guy who was he was his conference's player of the year last year. He's very efficient.
He was a first team All-American.
Yeah, first team All-American, had a few double doubles. I mean, this is a guy who can play.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a tough blow. It kind of reminds me, it's not the same thing. It's not apples to apples at all, because we don't know what role he would have had last year. But remember, Jacob Cole hurt his foot in summer workouts last year. And he actually, I think, could have made it back, but they were so far into the season by the time he was healthy and stuff that they just ended up redshirting him.
Yeah.
Kind of similar sentiment in terms of like this is not what we needed. It's summer workouts. Like, we're not even in game. We're not even in full blown, like, getting ready for the season yet. And you have a big injury. Just unlucky, unfortunate. And it just stinks for Nwankwo. And hopefully he can make it back fully healthy and be ready to, contribute. Maybe, like I said, maybe at the end of this year, but at the very least, hopefully next year, ready to go.
Over the last, I want to say it was the last like 6 or 8 weeks of his JUCO season, he averaged like 25 points and 8 rebounds, and he was shooting like 40% from deep.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
This kid can play. Like, he's still a little bit raw. Like I said, he played college football, but basketball was always his love. He only played high school football for, I think, a year or two, just because he thought that was his best chance of, getting a scholarship to go somewhere. And then decided he wanted to get back to playing basketball, went the JUCO route, and was one of the top JUCO players in the country last year. Making that transition from JUCO to Division I, let alone a conference like the SEC, is not always seamless. But this is a guy that, like you said, at the very least, they thought he was going to be a rotation player, if not a starter.
Right.
And that's tough to lose.
Right. So we'll see how they plan to fill that void, fill in those minutes. And obviously that'll be a question that Porter Moser is asked and answered for next time we get to talk to him, whenever that may be. And no telling, season's still a few months away, but sure it'll come up. So a tough blow there. But to end on a positive note, and maybe this is the answer to that question I just asked, we'll see. Oklahoma made a big splash on the recruiting side over the weekend that came together really quickly, at least it seemed like, with Jeremiah Fears. So Jeremiah Fears is a 4-star combo guard from Arizona. This is a guy who's in the top 40 in our rankings at 24/7 Sports in the country in 2025. Top 40 player, top 10 combo guard in the country. Now, he was an Illinois committee, decommitted. There are rumblings or a belief that he may reclassify up to 2024, which would put him on the team this year, right? I mean, Tom, what's happening here? Because I think a lot of fans, I'm including myself, were kind of like, wait, what's happening now with this guy? He came together fast. All of a sudden, they got this 4-star, highly touted prospect, top 50. I mean, this is one of the biggest recruits OU basketball has had, at least in terms of ranking, since literally Trae Young. How did this happen? And kind of on what this could mean. I mean, this is kind of wild.
Yeah, in the modern recruiting era, he is the second highest rated commit that they've gotten behind Trae Young.
Yeah,
and his game is kind of similar to Trae's. When you watch him play, he's a very dynamic scorer. Got great handles, can move well with the ball, create for others. I think that the spacing that Oklahoma believes it's going to be able to get with its improved, 3-point shooters on this team is going to make things a little bit easier for him. Like you said, the expectation is that he's going to reclassify and will be on campus in August and practicing with his team. It's a big get, man. The weird thing is, look, we discussed it. We thought they were done with this roster because they were at 13 scholarship players. That is the limit.
Yeah.
But thanks to NIL, there are workarounds to that. We've seen that with Brent Venables in football. Like, they find ways to get quality players who they think they can contribute by basically getting them, at the very least, the equivalent of a scholarship value through NIL. I think with a player of this caliber, you're probably talking about getting more than just scholarship value. In terms of, and I thought it was interesting, like after he committed, you saw Porter Moser and like several people associated with the program, whether they were staffers or administrators, tweet out some celebratory remarks, but also be like, hey, join One Oklahoma.
Yeah. Right.
It's like the writing's kind of on the wall for the route that they went here. I mean, it's a big get. He's a guy who, look, I think that, Duke Miles is going to be your starting point guard, but this is a guy who can come in and compete right away in that backcourt. I'm curious to see how it's going to work out just because, we've seen that Porter Moser doesn't always play his freshman right away. But this guy is a different talent than what they've had before. Like you said, I think he's number 32 player in the 2025 class. We'll see where that ranking kind of slots him when he reclassifies and gets re-ranked. But he is a very good player and kind of one of those dynamic guys that this team didn't necessarily have the last few years. So really curious to see how that works out. Obviously, great news for Oklahoma. They put it together pretty quickly the last 2 to 3 weeks after he decommitted from Illinois and the possibility of reclassifying was on the table. He's from the Chicago area, just like Porter Moser. So you got those ties there that,
so that helps.
Try to sell him on. His brother's another talented player. I think he's at Michigan State right now, if I remember correctly. So they worked quickly and tirelessly, and it paid off for them.
Yeah, you mentioned my question. Yeah, is he going to play as a true freshman? Because that's been the something that has been a theme under Porter Moser. He's very hesitant to play the kids, and he's talked about that openly with us, with the media before that. That now obviously that was in the Big 12 new league, but I'm sure the sentiment still remains in that he always talk about how the Big 12 is an old league, that there's not a lot of freshmen who play. It's you've got to play veterans and things like that because his first year. He ended up mixing Bijan Cortez and CJ Noland in a little bit. The previous year, he didn't really go to Milo Susan and Ortega Owa until it really just the season kind of got away from them. Mm-hmm. And it was clear the way it was headed. They put him in the lineup and they started letting him play. And then last year, we talked about it all year. He just never played Caden Cooper at all. And Jacob Cole redshirted the season. So under him, in whatever staff he's had in that given year, they have not really leaned on kids. But again, to the original, at the beginning of this is the highest rated prospect he's had. Does that change anything? We'll see, I guess. So that's going to be a question mark. And that's another thing that I'm curious to hear from Porter whenever we get to talk to him next. Could you see this kid playing a lot this year or not? Because, we thought that was going to be the case with Caden Cooper last year and didn't go that way. So very interested to see how that ends up shaking out.
Yeah, and I do wonder if, look, we all know that this is kind of a make or break season for Porter Moser in year 4. Sure. If kind of the urgency kind of propels him to take, I don't want to say take some risks, but maybe step outside of his comfort zone and play a freshman a little bit more to see if it gets the results that they need. This team needs to make the NCAA tournament this year. They can't be the first team out, the second team out of the field for the third time in 4 years. That's not going to cut it. They need to take a step forward with this new look roster. And look, we talked about, what impact is Jeff Nwankwo's injury going to have on them. I think the good thing for them is that they have some guys that have a little bit of, it seems at least that they have some positional flexibility. Obviously, you're adding another backcourt piece now in Jeremiah Fears. Does that mean that, Jaden Jones and Bryson Goodine kind of become your guys at the 3 now because you have another piece in the backcourt? I thought for sure at the very least that Bryson Goodine would probably be your wing behind Nwankwo. But now does that maybe push Jaden Jones to the starting 3 spot, open up some other options at the 2 next to Duke Miles and see moving forward? And one of the other things that we haven't talked about yet is they're still trying to add another piece. There's another Alabama transfer who is visiting campus today, Monday, Chris Barker, who is a top 100 recruit in the 2023 class, redshirt last season, Alabama. He's a 6'9" wing, kind of fits what they need again. And again, it's just about trying to, move the pieces around to make sure that you can make that roster work numbers wise, because, again, you're at the 13 scholarship limit, even though Jeff Nwankwo is injured and likely out for the season, he's still there and he's still on scholarship.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. It's certainly some more roster movement and intrigue than we kind of expected at this point in the calendar, this close to,
Sure.
starting the fall semester. But look, if things do not go well for Oklahoma this year, it's not going to be for a lack of effort and trying on Porter Moser and his staff's part to make it work.
For sure. It's going to be really interesting, the chess pieces and just kind of whenever we actually get to, scrimmages, stuff like that. And then obviously the season, the games, but just how does the rotation work? Because Porter Moser likes to play 7, 8, sometimes 9 guys, but you have way more than that right now that feel like viable options. They're trying to add another one, like you said. So we'll see. Interesting place to be in right now. And we'll see. Like you said, you think the urgency this year has never been higher. And so maybe that'll push them to, I think you're kind of seeing it with the way they're approaching the roster. So we'll see. Going to be interesting. I think that's it. Appreciate everyone for tuning in as always. Be back on Thursday, the plan, with Colin, Kennedy, and myself. Catch up on a bunch of recruiting stuff. We should be back on normal schedule now, Monday, Thursday, pretty much. Hopefully throughout really the rest of the year. I mean, we'll see once fall camp gets started. Sometimes, if there's a press or a practice or whatever, we may have to move around. But we should be on a pretty normal 2-show-a-week schedule now moving forward throughout fall camp and into the season, which is just 5 weeks and change away, which is crazy. We're 5 weeks from the first game week. 5 weeks from today will be game week, which is nuts. And so we're excited. We're ready to go, though. Be sure to subscribe to Oklahoma247sports.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the podcast feed, all that good stuff. And we'll see you back here next time. But, Tom, any last things? I want to make sure you had a chance. Look, you had something else. I want to make sure I didn't give you the opportunity.
I'm good.
That's it for now. We'll be back next week or on Thursday, like I said. For Tom Green, I'm Josh Callaway. That's it. We'll see you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.